But yes, thank you everyone for coming along on your lunch hour to listen to Natalie talk about moral injury. So this was something that was new to me. So it wasn't something which I'd come across before. I think it was a law care article which I read, which Natalie had been involved in. And I just thought it was, really interesting. It's something about the stresses and strains of work that we don't always think about in this way. But really, without further ado, I wanted to sort of hand over to Natalie to sort of introduce yourself and, why this is your sort of topic of choice and why you're the expert in this field.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to, as you said, talk about something that I'm very passionate about. So my name is Dr. Natalie Isaia. I'm actually a clinical psychologist. So my original training and background started in the usual way. I worked and trained within the NHS. I specialised in trauma and PTSD, and then I went into the charity sector. So specifically, I went to work in the homelessness sector and found myself quite quickly working with teams and organisations rather than individuals. And this work included quite a bit of work with legal teams. So this is charity sector specifically. They were doing legal aid and pro bono. So my bread and butter for the last sort of 8 years or so has been developing and delivering training and also facilitating reflective practice sessions. And as I said, that includes to lawyers and firms. And I don't know why, but there was just something about working with lawyers I loved immediately. I found it really interesting, really rewarding. There's potentially some sort of personality synergies. I think lawyers tend to be like really ambitious and driven and,
Mm-mm.
maybe a bit perfectionistic. I might recognize a few of those traits.
Yeah.
Um, so I took a real interest sort of quite early on in learning about the pressures of the legal sector specifically and sort of the
Okay.
psychology, if you like, of lawyers. And then alongside that journey, I became interested in moral injury
Mm,
as a concept which came to my attention during the pandemic. And I immediately saw how relevant it was to the sector I was working in. As soon
mm-mm.
as I started having conversations with lawyers around it, again, that immediately resonated. I could see how relevant it was. And the more I've learned about this topic over the years, I've been, again, talking about it and training on it. I see that it's relevant to the whole legal sector.
Mm,
Um, so in 2024, I made the decision to start my own business, Empresa Psychology. And the aim of that really is to bring my specialist knowledge and all of my experience outside of the charity sector
mm-mm.
into the corporate world. So across all practice areas. And I'm particularly, as you said, sort of banging the drum for moral injury at the
Mm,
moment.
mm.
But I'm also keen, I think I can really add value with other areas of expertise like psychological safety, compassionate leadership, evidence-based stress management tools. So
Mm-mm.
it's
I
not
think
just moral injury, but that's a real passion of mine.
we hear more and more, don't we? These terms come up sort of in the corporate world or in the legal world. In my case, sort of new things come through, and I think all your sort of your burnout. You said about vicarious trauma and things like this. We've sort of heard about them maybe a bit more, but what is therefore define this moral injury then, and what it is, and how it's relevant.
So we have to be really clear that it's distinct from burnout and distinct from vicarious trauma. So as we know, burnout is about an imbalance between your workload or your stress level and your resources. So whether your
Hmm.
internal resources or your sort of resources around you, socially, practically. So theoretically, and I say that because the system doesn't make it easy, we can resolve burnout by rebalancing, decrease your hours, decrease your workload, increase your resources. Vicarious trauma is specifically about exposure to other people's trauma, so will not be
Okay.
relevant to all practice areas. You're going to see it in immigration law again, sort of glaringly, and other sort of high risk practice areas for that, but it's not relevant to all lawyers.
Hmm.
Moral injury is separate from both of those. So we're talking about the impact on us when we are having to do actions within our role because of the nature of our role and because of the constraints of the system or regulations that we have to adhere to, that actually conflict with our personal ethics or our personal values. And we also feel this when we're witnessing the system around us potentially causing harm to individuals that we're unable to prevent. So this is always in the context of us working within systems that are, as I said, working in ways that maybe don't align with our personal values and our personal ethics. So if we're just to sort of close the loop on the burnout and vicarious trauma element there, if we're mislabeling moral injury as burnout, if we go, oh, it's just burnout, this feeling is just burnout, that's really problematic, because as I'll come on to say, the intervention, the things that we need to do about moral injury is different. So it means that we're potentially wasting money and wasting time on interventions that aren't hitting the mark, which can sort of actually increase disengagement. So in legal practice, what you're going to be seeing really is these unresolved ethical conflicts day to day, maybe subtly, maybe not so subtly, when you've got lawyers doing their jobs really well. They're doing what they have to do within their role, within the systems that they're working within, but it's not quite aligning with their personal ethics. So you're going to, in the first instance, maybe have feelings of guilt, even though you know something's not your fault. This is often alongside a related concept that we won't go too much into today, but it sits within systemic betrayal, so a sense of resentment and frustration towards the system. And again, I want to really clarify that this is systemic. I'm not for a second suggesting that there are law firms or lawyers out there doing bad things and behaving unethically and, you know, breaking rules. This is about people doing their jobs well. And that's the whole point. They're actually doing their jobs really well, and they're within all the regulations that they need to be within. So it's just, you know, something that comes from the fact that we are working and living within systems and societies that don't always act completely ethically. And the other thing I really want to clarify is that moral injury in itself is not a mental health problem. You're not going to see moral injury in a diagnostic manual. I always say to people that moral injury is a sign that you are a good person with good values. So in that sense, you can't stop moral injury from happening. But the problem arises when moral injury accumulates over time and we don't process it, we don't address it. So what happens then is it's building up, the negative impacts are building up, it's exacerbating burnout. It's compounding the effects of vicarious trauma where that's relevant. And it's leading potentially, if it builds up enough over time, to mental health distress, to depression, to anxiety, and ultimately people leaving. So the final thing I want to say on this is kind of the impact, what you're going to see if you're a firm. When you've got these kind of repeated and unresolved ethical conflicts, you're going to see that impacting on engagement, productivity, and specific types of attrition. So with engagement, people do this very quietly because they can see clearly that, well, this is part of my role, I'm just doing my job. They're not going to be saying, I need to speak up about this, I need to push back on this. They're going to be getting on with their work, but quietly over time, just maybe doing less of that discretionary effort, just feeling less engaged. We know that values-based working is one of the top predictors of good mental health at work. So if you're actively working in a non-values-based way, that's going to have a really detrimental impact to your mental health in the workplace. It's then, of course, going to impact your productivity. So, you know, if I'm not really feeling comfortable about a piece of work, I might be putting something off, avoiding something, doing some extra checking around it. Or if I'm feeling burnout alongside, then of course you've got those impacts. So I might be making more mistakes, I might be taking time off sick. And then most impactfully, as I said, you have what we call values-based attrition. So people leaving because of that sense of, this doesn't feel right. What am I doing here? This just doesn't feel right for me. And the key of this is that because there isn't language for this at the moment. No one's sitting in an exit interview telling you, I'm leaving because of moral injury. They won't say that.
Yeah,
You don't
yeah.
know who's leaving from moral injury because we're not talking about it. So, you know, this
I,
this,
I,
this accumulates and becomes a real kind of business issue.
Definitely, and I can see the difference as well because that burnout piece, like you say, all the help, and it is help around burnout, is about
Hmm.
that rebalance, and sort of taking ownership and doing what you can within the systems, pushing back where appropriate, and all that sort of thing. But you could do all of that in the world, and still that moral injury is still going to have an impact, and that would then lead to more frustration and then more, why can't I fix it sort of thing and that kind of thing. Whereas it's not you kind of thing. So it's a
Exactly.
different approach needed kind of thing. Yeah, no, that's
Exactly.
interesting.
You can reduce your caseload right down. You can reduce your
Mm,
hours
mm,
right down. But if it's moral injury that's the driver, that's not going to help.
no, definitely, definitely. So yeah, I mean, in terms of how it shows up in law, then I guess that's the big picture. But have you got any specifics in terms of examples, how it can show up for sort of different areas of law? And what we were going to ask people as well, if you want to sort of interact, then please do, but put your comments in the chat box and then I can ask them. It just makes it easier because we are recording this session. It means we can share it afterwards without anyone else being sort of on camera. But if you have any questions, put them in the chat box and I can sort of ask them, because I think that we probably could all come up with examples of how this sort of plays out in the legal world. But what sort of things have you seen then? How do you feel it most impacts or where it does impact?
Yeah, I think moral injury is one of those things. As soon as I start to talk about it with someone and give them a definition, there's this like light bulb that goes on very quickly within sort of 10 seconds or so. And pretty much universally, someone will go, "Oh my gosh, yes, I recognize this." Everyone's going to have their own examples. And it's not just in law. I talk
Mm,
about this with people all the time, and lots of people in professions do. I think there's a part of this that's slightly baked in to the legal culture. So we've already sort of talked about the fact that this is very systemic. So there is something about being a lawyer where you are doing what's legally right, or like, is
mm,
this allowed to in this case, for example, rather than is this ethically right? Sometimes those two things align. That's wonderful, but they don't always align. So there's an element that this could show up anywhere at any time just because of that inherent tension in the profession. And we're going to, I know, come back to thinking about the impact on junior lawyers specifically later on, but you're also going to see it across um, sort of levels of qualification or experience. So with junior lawyers and trainees, I think they're particularly at high risk because they've got less agency over what they're doing. So they're
mm,
given a piece of work, they want to progress their career, they want to do a really good job, they have to do it, they're not going to question it. And
mm,
I think that's actually exacerbated by the fact that we've got younger generations coming in now who care more about their personal values being aligned with their work, and they're wanting their employers to work in a values-based way. So those are two sort of very sort of generic across all practice areas examples.
mm, mm.
Then we've got what I'll refer to as kind of the high risk practice areas where it should be quite obvious to anybody where moral injury is going to show up. So I suppose the where I started off looking at this in the charity sector was mostly with immigration lawyers.
Okay.
So there's really glaring examples there. So if you have to sit in front of somebody and tell them that the Home Office has refused their asylum application, but they're not just a case number to you. You've spent hours talking to this person, you know all about their family, you know all about their trauma. You strongly believe that they deserve to stay in this country and be safe. But you're the person sitting in front of them, having to give
Mm,
them that message. And, you know, it's likely that they will express their anger, frustration, distress to you. So any kind of good human being is going to sit there and potentially feel guilty, even
absolutely.
though they
Yeah.
know this isn't my fault, but I'm
Mm,
working within this system, which is actively trying to sort of maybe not,
mm,
not keep people here. So immigration law,
mm.
that's going to come up regularly, I would assume. Employment law is another area. So I did a podcast last year about moral injury in HR. Big
Right. Yeah.
overlap here. So you've got, if I'm trying to defend a company, obviously I'm working on behalf of a company, and there might have been, some discrimination, but my job is to either sort of make sure that the person involved is, maybe they get some compensation, but they don't say anything, like keep it quiet, we'll give you the compensation. I'm feeling uneasy because I'm thinking actually this discrimination is going to continue, or to just defend it completely and find the loopholes that mean that, that person's case can't go forward and the employer is safe from that. So again, I'm doing my job really well. I'm using all the tools at my disposal, but ethically, I'm like, I kind of see the point of the employee actually. And if I was there, I think I'd be, so it might sit not very comfortably with us. Insurance, personal injury, very, similar.
Right, yes, yes. I know loads of people in personal injury is one of those ones where people often cannot move between defendant and claimant because they just morally can't do it because they've spent so long in claimant that they can't do defense, or in fact sort of vice versa. They just, you sort of one side or the other, and that's been baked in now sort of thing, so they can't change.
Absolutely. And again, it's not that people really want to deny people their insurance claims or prolong their suffering or put a price on their suffering. But if we feel that that's what our role involves in order to do it well, that's probably going to cause distress. Another glaring example is criminal defense. So if I'm defending someone and I believe that potentially they might be guilty, my job is to defend them, and that's such an important part of our justice system. We don't want to take that away, but that's going to cause a very obvious ethical conflict for that individual. And I guess the other high risk practice area is family law, and again, just baked in, there's so many ethical conflicts that come up when we're thinking about the nuances of different needs. So we might have a custody agreement that we need to draft or sort of stick to the framework of, but actually not really feel like it's in the best interest of the child. Or we might have to actually try to escalate conflict in order to win a case and know that that's going to have a detrimental impact on the family. So I keep saying it because it's so important. None of this is about people being bad people, doing bad things. They're doing their jobs.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's the thing, isn't it? It is part of the job, it is part of the role, and you're working your best for your client to achieve the best outcome from your client. That is the law. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, fair enough, fair enough. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, how do you see it sort of on the commercial side as well then? Because you said those are sort of the high risk ones. I would
Yeah.
imagine the commercial side is more in the low risk category then.
Yeah, so yes, actually, I mean, it's interesting language, isn't it? I suppose, but there are, of course, lower risk practice areas. As I said, what I see in working with lawyers is that this can come up anywhere, but there'll be more subtle manifestations of it in certain practice areas. So you might have, as I said, I've done quite a lot of work in homelessness, so real estate, property law. You might be impacting individuals, so you might have to evict people, perhaps because they're in arrears, or perhaps because they're for other people's safety. So it's a good reason to do it, but know that you're making somebody homeless. So that might go against the personal value. Or on a bigger scale, you might be working for a massive property developer, and a new sort of luxury development that they're building is going to displace lots of people who maybe are on lower income and are going to be pushed out of the area. It's kind of, in that sense, perhaps harming or changing a community, having a negative impact on the community, and you're aware of that. But again, you're working on behalf of the big corporate.
Yeah.
And I guess that feeds into sort of any commercial corporate. If we're working for big companies, they're not always thinking about the impact of what they're doing on individuals. So it might be about drafting, I don't know, terms and conditions that the end customer is going to find very difficult to navigate. So you're protecting, the big corporate, but the individual on the other end of that. It might be The classic, and again, this ties back into HR examples around, we use a lot of interesting language, don't we? Transformations and restructures and
Oh yeah, restructure
efficiencies and
covers a
and
lot of things.
what we're talking about is making people redundant. And if we're
Yeah,
having to
yeah.
either kind of sit in front of someone and implement that, or draft the, redundancy agreements, then again, you're doing a job, it's
Mm,
important for the business to survive.
mm,
But the upshot is people are going to lose
yeah,
their
yeah.
jobs. Um,
Definitely, definitely. And I think I know, I mean, examples of things that I've come across, I've definitely spoken to people who have done too many evictions, who feel that they just can't do any more evictions
yeah,
because it's been too negative. It's mortgages as well, isn't it? Around like your repossessions and that kind of thing as well, once
exactly.
you get into this. And again, I think it's, it's that's really actually, traumatic work if you're not careful because day to day you're doing it. And then I
Mhm.
know people just in litigation as well who have said that they sort of the conflict, I think it's almost like deciding which hat have I got to wear today and just
Yep.
putting on that hat and wearing it for the purposes of that client. And then maybe the next day almost sort of switching it and wearing an entirely different hat for a different client. And I think that is wearing on I guess not on everyone, but certainly some people I've spoken to quite senior in their careers as litigators, they've just found that that sort of, conflict endlessly is
Yeah.
causing them problems. But I would imagine it is almost it is the conflict of morality as well, that you're changing your morality client by client because that's the job sort of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, or not changing your
Oh,
morality so
yeah,
much,
no,
but
that's the
having
wrong.
to put it aside more.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think with litigation, you've got multiple things again compounding each other. So it's not all the moral and just the conflict, as you say, the inherent nature of the conflict
Yeah,
is
yeah,
stressful to the human brain
yeah.
and then stressful to our nervous system. But then anytime you're having to defend something where personally and ethically you don't
Mm-mm.
necessarily believe it's right, or and again, I'm not suggesting this is a bad thing, it's part of the job, but having, using tactics maybe to drag out a case so that the other side
Sure.
runs out of money, it's
Mm-mm.
these sorts of things. I mean, maybe there are people out there who love it, but some people aren't going to feel particularly comfortable doing that, but they know they have to.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. No, it is interesting how it sort of shows up. Um, so yeah, you've sort of said that sometimes people feel sort of things are wrong, but they can't quite name it
Mhm.
almost. Why do you think that I mean, you said it's not talked about, we don't have the language, but sort of why hasn't it come to the fore before now? Why hasn't it been
Yeah.
identified?
It's simply because it's not a known concept outside of the military and more recently
Okay.
healthcare. So I liken this very much to vicarious trauma that we keep mentioning. I'd be really surprised if someone was listening to this or watching this and hadn't heard of vicarious trauma. But 20 years
Mm.
ago, no one had
Mm.
heard of vicarious trauma.
Yeah.
There were a few people talking about it, but the legal sector was unaware of it. And now it's
Mm.
baked in. This is a real risk factor. We have to protect people from it. We have to address it. I see moral injury as the next version of that. I think it's just that it's simply currently not a known concept.
Mm.
Clearly, that's I'm on a mission to change that. If you type moral injury into Google, what you're going to
Mm.
see mostly is military. That's where the concept was
Okay.
first defined. It's been most heavily researched in military contexts. More recently, and particularly through the pandemic, we started looking at it in frontline healthcare. And again, it's interesting the language we use there, isn't it?
Okay.
Frontline healthcare. So the
Yeah, yeah.
NHS. So you're seeing more of that. But outside of those two industries, there's very little. So
Okay.
if you give it a go, type moral injury in law
Yeah,
into
yeah.
Google, not very much comes up. So I think my article that you mentioned that was published with Law Care last month is just a LinkedIn article. I think that's on the first page, which really shows
Right.
how little there is out there. It's just a very brief
Yeah,
little
yeah.
explainer. Um, the
Yeah.
other thing that comes up that I wanted to mention, because I think it would be of interest to your watchers and listeners,
Mm.
is an academic paper that was published in Australia
Okay.
last year, and it had more of like a legal angle to it. So in a nutshell, basically it was saying that moral injury is an avoidable and foreseeable harm. that employers should be protecting people from, all employers, not just law firms. And what they were suggesting is that there are credible legal arguments that actually employers could be held responsible if they don't
Right.
protect people
Yeah.
from it. Now, I'm not saying that to scare people.
Mm.
What I'm here to say is that this exists and that it's actually relatively straightforward, as we'll come on to mitigate the impact. But I think it's coming. even if I wasn't talking about it, I think it's coming anyway.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I think it's really important to sort of get ahead of
Well,
it.
there's been things like that, hasn't there? Just springs to mind like the sort of sexual misconduct at work and discrimination and things like, there used to be you weren't allowed to discriminate, and now there's a duty to protect against, and
Mhm.
it's the bars shift, don't they? So it's sort of and with the military and the front line kind of thing, that's interesting as well, because concepts like PTSD, they started in a military sense, but now people do refer to them, don't they, in terms of PTSD from work and certainly from COVID and that sort of thing when it was,
Yeah.
frontline workers. But I think people those they do sort of come from that into the working world in a in a small t trauma sense, if you know what I mean. That's what they say, isn't it, with PTSD? Um, so I guess everything does sort of feed back in the end, doesn't it? It all links back in the end to our lives, because our lives are, we're still people interacting, be it on a big dynamic, frontline scale, or in a
Mm.
lower key sort of, day-to-day basis. I guess it's the same thing's impact, just to a greater or lesser extent, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think just to be really clear, I mean, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is a very clinically defined
Yeah, yeah,
disorder. The sort of small t trauma that you're referring to, we do, psychologists do talk about that, as
yeah,
something that may or may not meet that clinical threshold for PTSD. But as I said, we're not talking about trauma here. Moral injury
sure.
isn't, it is not even defined as a mental health problem. It can lead to mental health problems and all the other
Mm,
sort of commercial impacts that we're talking about. But it does sit quite separately from the trauma piece. Of course, some traumas may have moral injury baked in, but that's not,
yeah, yeah.
what we're sort of discussing
Yeah,
primarily
I
here
think
today.
it is just that it's the nuance, isn't it, of how people talk about things. That's what I mean. It's like the language
Yes,
develops,
no,
doesn't it? And these
absolutely.
things become terms that people are
Yeah.
familiar with, whereas, like you say, 20 years ago, there wasn't any of these things. So yeah, yeah.
And interestingly, moral injury, even in research, even in the contexts where it came from, still not, a particularly clear definition for it. I'm
Right.
I'm I'm trying to give you as clear a definition as I can today, pinned to concrete examples. But again, if anyone wants to deep dive, what you're going to see is that there are actually different definitions for it in academia. And I think one of the challenges of having this conversation, aside from this sort of anecdotal, is that because we're looking at this in a new field,
Mm,
there aren't lots of numbers yet. I hope there will be. So one thing that I'm doing at the moment is collecting some informal data. So over the next few months, I'm doing several of these awareness raising webinars and trainings and events. And I'm trying to poll people. So obviously that they're it's lawyers who are attending, so we're doing little polls. I've done one so far,
hmm.
which I'll tell you the results of in a second, and then I'm also doing a webinar for law care in June, free to attend, and I'm hoping that we're going to be able to do the poll again. And
Mm,
what I'm really excited for there is that with the law care webinar, I'm expecting a range of people across different practice areas. So as we've just said, um, different practice areas are going to see it a little bit more or less. So
mm,
I'm
mm.
fascinated to see the poll results for the law care compared to the poll results for the one I did a couple of weeks ago. So that one was for a more high risk practice area. I won't go into more details because these are all anonymized results.
Sure.
And we had about 30 people responding. But
Mm,
what was striking was that everybody said that they've experienced moral injury, and actually, because we did it by sort of how often people experience it, 2/3 of people said they were experiencing it daily or weekly, which really
okay.
is going to add up over time. We
Mm,
asked people whether their firm had specific provisions for moral injury, like you would for vicarious trauma. All
mm,
but one said that they didn't. I was so thrilled that there was a firm out there who's doing it. I did
Yeah.
say to them, because it's an anonymized poll, I did say, oh, can someone write in the chat whose firm is that? And they did, so I don't know.
Oh.
And then we asked them, do they think that their firm should be having
Mm-mm.
a specific provision, and all but one said yes. So this is quite striking, really, that
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
just me saying, I think,
No,
people
no,
are
it's
validating this.
no, definitely, definitely. No, fine. So yeah, so with all of this, then what sort of what is there that we can do if you're recognizing this, you're thinking this is something, obviously most people are seeing themselves in this. What do we do?
So there's lots of different things you can do at different levels. So for individuals who are watching this, I usually talk about what I call as an introductory tool. And as we've been saying throughout, one of the most important things is having the language for this, because just to sort of recap what I said earlier, the trick with moral injury is that you can't necessarily stop it, but you need to be processing it as you go in order to stop it building up and mitigating that negative impact on your well-being and your performance. I,
Mm,
I like to think of it as a bit like digestion, your digestive system. So if you're experiencing moral injury sort of once a week, then
hmm.
if you process it as you go, that's fine. You can process it in bite-sized chunks. It's not going to accumulate. Whereas if you let it build up, build up, build up, build up, it's going to have a much bigger impact and start to cause problems over time.
Mm,
Um, so in brief, this tool involves being able to label the moral injury. So put a word to it. And actually,
hmm.
because I deliver training on this a lot, and there's always most of the room, and when I come to say what was your main takeaway, will say just having the word for it. Just having the word for
Okay.
it. You already feel so much better almost knowing that it's a thing, but you can then go a level down. You can name the actual moral that was violated. This takes a little bit of practice because we don't tend to walk around thinking about our morals explicitly
No.
in our mind. I don't walk around thinking, you know, everybody deserves safe asylum if their country of origin is, putting their life at risk. But I believe that. I don't necessarily articulate that in my mind. So something about naming that can be tricky in itself. Naming the emotion. So there is a lot of good neuroscience backing this up. So when I'm stressed or upset, when my threat system is active, the way my brain evolved is that my threat system is going to take over my brain. It's going to
Okay.
down regulate my frontal lobe, and it's your frontal lobe that does everything you need to do your job well. Your planning, your problem solving, your information processing, and your emotion regulation, ironically. So when I name an emotion, I'm switching on my language center, which is connected to my frontal lobe. So I activate my frontal lobe, which then regulates the emotion. So people might go, well, what's the point? If I say I feel this, isn't that going to make me feel worse? No, actually, the neuroscience says that it's going to help.
Okay.
Putting
I guess it
putting the
takes away
words in
that
front of me.
takes away the mystery, sort of, oh, I feel awful. If all you're left with is that I feel awful, but then if you stop yourself and like, okay, break it down, why do I feel awful? I suppose that's the thing. You're not just stuck in a thing of there, it's not right sort of thing. You've actually broken it down and named it. I can see how that would help.
Yeah. I mean, yes, you're right, but also it's even more basic than that, because what you've just said there is quite intellectual, it's quite cognitive, whereas what I'm talking about is just happening on a neural level. It's almost
Yeah.
just physiological in itself. It's just switching on a different part of your brain.
Mm.
Um, I always find it interesting when I talk about this introductory framework. I'm thinking, yes, so easy to do. And actually, I do realize that the vast majority of people out there are not used to stopping or thinking about the impact of work upon them day to day, or naming their emotions. And so, even the intro tool, I think, often needs a bit of, prep, a bit of support to help people to get the hang of it. But then the
Mm-mm.
final part of it is about bringing in the balance. So you never want to negate the moral injury. If anyone's familiar with the model of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, you'll do a lot of thought challenging. What's the evidence for and against this thought? You can't do that with moral injury because it's real. And you don't want
Mm-mm.
to say it's fine, because it's not fine. But what you do want to do is hold both. So you're saying, yes, I feel guilty because XYZ. And at the same time, there's this idea of moral repair. So I'm going to use the asylum application because it's just a nice, easy one. I've had to tell this person that their asylum application has been rejected, but I'm going to appeal it. That's my moral repair. And
Okay.
actually, this other person, we didn't win, and they did get deported, and I feel horrible about that. But there's so many other people on my caseload, so many other people on my waiting list who need my help, and I'm still going to work in my values-based way. I'm going to come to work tomorrow. I'm going to do my best for the next person. It doesn't take away what I've just experienced. It doesn't make it right, but I'm bringing in the balance, and that's
Mm.
like good psychology, good mental health is all about the balance.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, it is very balanced, isn't it? It is very nuanced in sort of how, because I assume that how everyone responds to it is different, and then how people respond, like you say, whether some people naturally, I suppose, just go on to the next case or feel positive about the next thing. I guess that's maybe people that are better able to, work in, say, the high risk areas of law and move happily through them, sort of thing. But it's not everybody does that, and you probably don't do that on every given day as
And
well,
you don't
you
have
know.
to. This is definitely not. So again, with just the time pressures in law, you can't be spending an hour a day thinking about this. This is very much, and that's why I love that like quick tool. That would be the sort of the surface level, the most basic thing you can do to protect yourself against this, especially if you're using it preventatively.
Mm-mm.
Um, but you have to keep functioning and doing your job, and you can't spend all day thinking, I feel guilty, I feel this, I feel that. So
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
definitely not about that. And again, I mean, we could probably talk for an hour just about this nuance, but because there's such an ingrained culture in law that strength and resilience is about just cracking on with it and not thinking
Mm-mm.
about your emotions. But ultimately, on a physiological level, I'm not talking about something abstract and or purely psychological here. I'm talking about physiology. If we ignore this stuff, again, much like your digestive system, and it's backing up, it's going to cause a physiological impact. And the thing with lawyers is you see this happen quite catastrophically. So you have people who go off sick for 6 to 9 months, who leave suddenly, who really sadly will take their own lives out of the blue. We didn't see this coming. So there are a lot of people out there who are genuinely thinking, no, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, because
Mm-mm.
our human brain is amazing, and our human brain will tell you you're fine, you're coping, keep going. And the legal
Mm-mm.
culture really sort of supports that strategy. um and maybe some people out there will keep going indefinitely, but the vast majority of human beings at some point are going to get to a point where that strategy stops working. So the point with this is that if anyone's listening to this and thinking, that feels like, it's extra time and it's extra effort, it's worth the investment of time. It's like, I hate
Mm.
exercising, but if I don't do any exercise, I will have arthritis at 50. And I need to be doing that regularly along the way to stay healthy. So what we're talking about here is sustainable resilience and
Mm.
sustainable
Mm.
careers and making yourself stronger by doing this.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And well, you mentioned that about the careers as well, and you said before about the juniors, you said about
Mm,
like this inoculation training. So
yeah,
it's kind of like at the start of their careers,
yeah,
setting people up, a bit like your weight training, setting you
yeah,
up for the long term. I guess that's what it's about.
exactly. So yeah, I've been using the phrase inoculation training a lot to get across this idea that we can get ahead of this. And that's what I meant earlier when I said this isn't the most difficult thing for a firm to be getting ahead of and being preventative about. If we can raise awareness, particularly early on. So as we said at the beginning of our conversation, you've got, trainees and junior lawyers are, they're facing the ethical conflicts, but with much less agency, much less ability to do anything about that. And perhaps they are more aware of their values and
Mm,
wanting to work in a
mm.
more values driven way. And we're seeing this, and I'm sure you might have seen there was an article published last year about junior associate attrition, and it
Oh
had
yeah,
doubled
yeah.
from 2024. This was in the US and the UK, but it had doubled from like 10% to, I think it was 16%. And that was costing like £1 million per firm per year or something in
That's right.
terms of
I do remember
attrition.
that one.
So
Mm.
my recommendation is that if we can get this, like just awareness raising level piece. It doesn't have to be an in-depth piece of training. The tool that I've just talked about there, teaching people how to do that, put a word to it, be aware of it, they're going to have much more sustainable resilience, much more sustainable careers. They'll also be more engaged because they're feeling that their firm is helping them work in, well, if not work in a values-based way, at least do something about that, if that's not, possible within their roles. So it inoculates them later on against damage.
Definitely. And I think you are right, because that more and more polls show that, yes, the juniors coming through want that purpose and want that within their working world. And they do want to see their values reflected in the people they're working for and this sort of thing. And I guess as well, even the very, very first thing you said, which is when you have a system, not even in law, but sort of in population, in a collective of people, there are rules, and they can't fit every circumstance all of the time, so there's always going to be people at the edges, at the outliers and all that, and just recognizing that it's not you, it's maybe not the firm, and it's maybe not even the legal system, it's just society has to have rules, and this is what we're working with. And sometimes they don't always tick the box for every single individual, and it's nothing personal reflected on you. It is inherently part of it.
Yeah.
Recognition of that alone is probably going to help some juniors to sort of
Yeah.
reconcile where they're at in terms of their career and the good they're doing, and maybe keep reflecting back on the good rather than fixating perhaps on some things which don't quite align now,
Mhm.
but where they maybe could help to align them in future. It's that
Yeah,
having more of a
exactly. That
long-term view.
you're bringing that balance and remembering I'm a good person. There are good things I'm doing. There are things that I'm doing to offset something that I perceived that wasn't so great over
Mm,
here. And I mean, obviously, prevention is better than cure. Ultimately, in the long run, there you're saving a lot of money, and that's quite a low cost thing to do. At a minimum, as you said, if someone doesn't want to do anything or invest anything, just getting the language into their
sure.
team,
Yeah.
into their firm, bare minimum, but it's still going to be helpful.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
so that people can talk about it.
No, fair enough. Well, that's what I was going to say, what can firms do practically, kind of
Mm.
thing. There's lots of well-being initiatives around at the moment. I guess that's what you're saying. First step, get that language in.
Yes. So as I said, I think this sits outside of the vast majority of wellbeing initiatives. Firstly, because there aren't as many people out there using this language. I'm not the only person talking about moral injury, but it's definitely not that common still at the
Mm,
moment. So your average wellbeing package or intervention or approach won't necessarily be explicitly looking at this or explicitly differentiating it from burnout and vicarious trauma and general stress. Um, so just on that piece around this goes beyond well-being. Um, I think that this is a risk that
mm,
firms need
mm,
to look at more from a sort of a commercial perspective, from a responsible business perspective. It's not just about pandering to people's emotions or making people feel better, and it's not even because we've talked about productivity and attrition and things that cost firms
mm,
money. It's
mm,
not even just about that. This is I mentioned that paper that was published earlier about duty of care, and it says in the Health and Safety Act that employers must take reasonable steps to reduce foreseeable risk to health. Now, this is a foreseeable risk to health. We might not be talking about it at the moment, but
mm,
it
mm,
very much is a foreseeable risk to health. So, from a responsible business perspective, and potentially in the future, if regulations do come in around this, we need to be, as I said, getting ahead of this. That's not a well-being issue. That is a risk and compliance issue. And it also feeds into things that regulators are already caring about and talking about. So obviously law really cares about ethics and are
mm,
people able to speak up? Are people able to question or act on ethical concerns? What impact is this having on people's judgment? As a sort of cultural drift that we're seeing. I think this ties into those kind of regulatory concerns as well. So at the top level, what can firms do? They can take this seriously as a risk issue, and
mm,
think about it from that perspective. So people sitting in responsible business roles can be thinking about, is this something we need to look at, you know, and how could this impact us? So that's one piece. More practically, and going back down to the other end of the spectrum, I see it as a bit of a hierarchical framework. So I have a framework that I use in my business to work with law firms, and this is personalized depending on the depth that they want to go into, or, you know, if they have a lot of high risk practice areas, they might have a more in-depth version. Whereas if you're purely doing, I don't know, property law, you might just do the light touch version. So you've got the awareness raising piece that we've sort of talked about. That could be even just a little session at an away day, just to get it into the, you know, firm culture and the language. You've got introduction of these kind of quick tools for people, and alongside that, in the legal sector, there is a growing culture of understanding that things like reflective practice sessions are really valuable. Not all firms have them, but increasingly more firms do them. It's something that I've been doing, it's been my bread and butter, and with my other role, my other hat on, for many years. And I'm quite a big fan of a rebrand, because I think a lot of what I see in practice is firms investing in this and actually lawyers asking for it. And then people are so busy and they really want to come and they struggle to use the spaces. So actually one thing I do is I really help teams, managers, firms, companies to think about how can we make these spaces more accessible? How can we reframe them to make them feel a bit less threatening for people? So, you know, resilience sessions or things like that. But basically there are multiple ways in which firms can put in place spaces where people can come and do this with each other, or they're encouraged to do this with each other. So that just becomes embedded in the team culture, and that processing as you go starts to become baked in a structural way. And then, oh, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, isn't it? It's getting it into the culture. It's getting it into the management technique, the leadership style, the, you know, everything about the firm, so that it's just something that's in the melting pot of good practice sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And there's so many ways to do that. As you've sort of alluded to there, you can also just think about it in the one-to-one. So if we're training our leaders to understand this, then it's a conversation that can be had. It won't always come up, but if it does come up, again, we've got that language, and we can validate that, and, you know, give some advice. And then the final piece is that there are much more advanced tools for people who are already experiencing a lot of moral injury, that they're already struggling with moral injury. So again, this is sort of specific training that I deliver, and I work through frameworks. So bringing in those evidence-based tools from the field of psychology. So the specific tools come from compassion-focused therapy, because I won't go into the psychology of it now, but it's a model which is recommended as the gold standard for addressing moral injury, because as I said before, you're not trying to negate the moral injury, you're bringing in the balance, which is what the model's all about. I know the title sometimes puts people off, but it's all about bringing in the sort of the strength and the courage and the wisdom, and what's the right thing, and what are we doing to sort of balance this out alongside validating. So it's similar, but there are much more in-depth frameworks and tools which I work through with teams, and then they have those, and they can go away and use those and put those tools into practice themselves as and when they need to. So it might be that they sit down at the end of a case and use it, or it might be that they sit down once a month themselves or with each other and use these, because they've been taken through it and they understand how to use that tool.
Yeah, like you say, that's the thing, isn't it? It's having it there so that you can pick it up when you need to and use it as you need to. So what would you say then? Obviously, like you say, this is a new topic, you're spreading the word out there. What if someone's sort of keen to sort of explore this more, maybe, you know, look at bringing it into their own practice personally, or introducing it to their management team, or whatever, you know, to get it addressed, what sort of next steps can they do, and what sort of things can a firm think about?
So I'm going to share my contact me slide whilst I'm talking that one through. So hopefully you can see that. I'm not. Oh, sorry. lost it. No, I'm not gatekeeping anything. But the reality is, as we discussed earlier, that if you type this into Google, you're not going to get very much. And this is something that I've been embedded in for many years now. This is the bread and butter of a lot of what I do day to day, week to week. So I'm across what is out there, and I can synthesize that. I can personalize that for people. So absolutely, by all means, go do a Google deep dive. But probably the easiest thing is to get in touch with me. So we've got, email, we've got my website, we've got, that's my business page, LinkedIn, but you can also look me up, Dr. Natalie Isaia, on LinkedIn. And if anyone is watching this and they are interested in thinking about what their firm can do, just book in a free chat with me. So that's the QR on the right hand side, and I'm really happy to talk that through, see if there's anything that I can do, or even just along the lines of what you and I have spoken about today, just thinking about what they might be able to start thinking about internally. And then if people are interested but not ready to do anything yet, you've also got the QR there at the bottom, which is my newsletter sign up. So I do a monthly newsletter, and there's it's not all about the legal sector, but there's quite a lot that's legal sector specific. And moral injury is definitely in there on a regular basis. There's lots of industry insights that I put in there. I do sort of make those commercial links, and offer sort of little tools and tips sometimes as well within that. So if you are interested, put yourself on that list, and you'll receive those on the first of every month.
Brilliant, brilliant. No, that's all really good. That's all really useful. I think it is so interesting. All these concepts, sort of like you say in psychology, these are, concepts which people are familiar with, and then they all sort of filter their way through, don't they, to, the working world. Yeah, it is interesting how they develop and how they grow and how they impact on a daily basis. But I think the more we know about all of these things, the more we can just be aware of them and be conscious of them. And, like you say, with the inoculation training for juniors, by knowing this stuff from the get-go, it's that long, sustainable career. It's a career that's going to be rewarding, that's going to be, you're going to thrive, you're going to feel happy because you've got all the tools and things in place to support you as you go along, which I just think is so important and so valuable.
Exactly. And, just to be really clear, I think it's so important to make all of this very practical and personalized. So a lot of what I do and have been doing for the last 8 years is taking the evidence-based theories and the evidence-based strategies, but make it adapting them really. So when I work with lawyers and law firms, these are adapted versions of those tools. So it's not just kind of some nice theory. It's kind of, I've made this really practical, really concrete, really usable, and really relevant to you in your role. And again, that's not just the moral injury piece. That's all the topics that I look at and I train on and I support with. It's all very you can go away tomorrow and then put this into practice from the training.
Sure. No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, I mean, we haven't had any questions in the chat box, but if anyone does want to put any final sort of thoughts or questions in the chat box, then please do feel free. But I think it's probably just given us all lots to think about, because I know it has for me. Yeah, I'm sure everyone will go away and have their thoughts on it, and say can look you up and get in touch. So thank you very much for coming and for sharing your knowledge with us. It's given me lots and lots to think about. That's what some other people are saying on the chat as well there. Yeah. So thank you for that. And yeah, we'll definitely keep in touch.
That's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.